Well, right now the fighting, at least from the perspective of the ISIS fighters, has concentrated around two different cities. One is Beji, particularly the oil refinery in Beji. It's the largest oil refinery in Iraq, but also in the city of Bakuba, which is just about 37 miles northeast of the capital, Baghdad. Two very strategic cities, both playing very important roles. That's where the fighting has been concentrated. But the refinery, if it does fall into the hands of ISIS fighters, would give them a tremendous amount of leverage over the country's oil resources, but it'll also be able to control a lot of the domestic supplies, and it's already creating a sense of anxiety here where we are and elsewhere, because people are lining up at the gas stations for hours because there's going to be a shortage of supplies in the coming days now that the refinery has been shut down.
It seems like things are really going from bad to worse. And Ambassador Wilson, we're seeing a swift reaction to this, and to really understand this current conflict, we kind of have to go back to that last rush to war. Take a listen to this trip down memory lane.
The British government has learned that Saddam Hussein recently sought significant quantities of uranium from Africa.
Obviously, that did trigger something of a rush into battle, which you played a role in stymieing with that famous New York Times op-ed where you protested one of those specific claims about nuclear weapons material. Do you see a similar rush into conflict fomenting this time around, Ambassador?
Well, what I do see is the same charlatans that sold us the Iraq War coming to the fore again to push again for U.S. actions, which I think would be really very ill-advised.
And we've been hearing from all of those architects of the last Iraq War. Paul Wolfowitz, for example. There's also a new op-ed in the Wall Street Journal today bashing the president for his reluctance to go in. How does it make you feel to see those folks out there and pressing their case again?
Well, it's very familiar. These are people who blame others for their own mistakes. I would have felt more comfortable had they all been speaking from behind bars in The Hague, where they should be.
Eamon, what are you hearing from Iraqis themselves on the ground about the prospect of more U.S. intervention at this point?
Well, it's certainly not welcome news for a lot of the Sunni Arab population. You know, today we heard from Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki. He gave an address to the nation in which he tried to put a united front, saying that it's time for Iraqis to put aside their sectarian differences and say that this was not the work of Iraqis, but the work of terrorists that are trying to affect the country and try to plunge it into civil war. So he was trying to strike a tone of national unity, but at the same time, there's no doubt that the Iraqi government is in desperate need of help. They're definitely turning to Iran for guidance, perhaps even some paramilitary support on the ground to help fight some of the ISIS fighters, and they're certainly going to need more leverage from the United States if they're going to try to launch any kind of large-scale operation to reclaim territory that's in the north. They simply don't have the manpower to deploy thousands of troops to Mosul, which is hundreds of miles away from the capital, to try and regain the northern part of the country, and that's why they would rely on U.S. air power, if it can, to soften targets to allow for troops to advance into the north. But highly unlikely that that's going to happen anytime soon.
Eamon, you mentioned Iran there, and Ambassador Wilson, that's been a subject of much contention now. Actually, the president is meeting with a lot of congressional leadership today, including John Boehner. He's been weighing in on this Iran question. Let's take a listen to that. I think we've got sound.
No, absolutely not. I can just imagine what our friends in the region, our allies, would be thinking by reaching out to Iran at a time when they continue to pay for terrorists and foster terrorism, not only in Syria, in Lebanon, but in Israel as well.
Ambassador, you know the inner workings of this region so well, and you know how complicated these divides between these countries are. Should Iran and collaboration with Iran be off the table at this point?
Well, I think we should certainly be speaking to others in the region, because in the first instance, this is an Iraq problem. In the second instance, it's potentially a regional problem. The Turks, we know, are talking to ISIS to try and secure the release of some of their Turkish truck drivers who have been arrested or have been taken hostage, basically. I think there are a number of things that we could be doing diplomatically. I'm surprised that nobody's been talking about engaging either the Gulf Cooperation Council or the Arab League or the United Nations at any level. I don't know what we're doing there, but we should certainly be talking to the Turks. I don't think it does any harm to talk to the Iranians to the extent to which we all want to stop this ISIS terrorist faction. But I would note that a few thousand hardened fighters would find it very difficult to make that trek from Tal Afar, from Raqqa in eastern Syria, all the way down to Beji. if they did not have the support of the Sunni population. And the reporting that I'm reading out of there suggests that what you're seeing is the ISIS force is basically the tip of the spear, but fully supported by a number of the Sunni tribes in the region.
Right. So it seems like actually even Iran
this is increasingly.
Go ahead.
Well, it's increasingly looking like a Sunni uprising. And the Sunnis are not going to appreciate the Iranians being on their land, that's for sure.
I think that seems to be the big fear, that more engagement with Iran could actually blow up sectarian tensions bigger than they even are right now. Ambassador, when we talk about this rush into conflict that you've been referring to from last time around, the striking thing is it was our leadership that we talked about, and actually including a lot of people I really respect. Richard Holbrooke was one of the hawkish voices calling for intervention at that point. But it was also the media, right? There was very little skepticism. There were people donning their hard hats and heading into battle. Do you think the media is being more responsible about adopting a skeptical tone this time around?
Well, when the media puts on Wolfowitz and Dick Cheney and these other charlatans who took us to war a decade ago, I don't think that's terribly responsible. Their advice is not worth anything. They're the ones who created this mess. They're going on television now simply to blame others for the mess that they created. I don't think that's very helpful to the public's understanding of what is really going on or how we should be reacting. But if people like John McCain and Lindsey Graham really want us to go back into war there, deploy air assets, what they ought to do is they ought to sponsor a sense of the Senate resolution, see how much support they get on the Hill.
And Eamon, you're still there with us in the field, I believe. Is there anything you wanted to ask Ambassador Wilson while we have him here?
Well, to be quite honest with you, I would really ask is, what could the U.S. possibly do in terms of its support for Prime Minister Maliki? Is there any chance perhaps that the United States would say to Prime Minister it's time for him to step aside? He's still struggling to form a coalition, and could there be a way perhaps in talking with Iran that they could ask Prime Minister to give somebody else a chance to try and make this a more pluralistic or inclusive government?
I'm sure we could, and I suspect our ambassador in Baghdad is in close consultations with Prime Minister Maliki about the way ahead. Certainly, he doesn't seem to be the man who's been able to close the sectarian divide. On the contrary, he's certainly exacerbated. He is no Nelson Mandela.
All right. Thank you so much, Ambassador Wilson and Eamon Mohideen. This was fascinating. Before we go to break, we just wanted to bring you to a live picture of the White House briefing room. Right now, Secretary Jay Carney is giving his final briefing. He said it's been an extraordinarily gratifying job, and he's been in that position for 3 years. We'll be following closely to see what comes next for him.